Hey everyone, it is Eric Machnez, Director of Operations at Red Clover.
And Jen Lestrange, CEO of Red Clover.
We are a strategic HR and change management firm, strategic HR and management consulting firm. Listen, I'm still enjoying my coffee. In New Jersey, but with clients across the country. Today we're talking more in depth in this coffee chat about employee benefits.
Yep.
And how this year, more than ever, small businesses are feeling the crunch due to larger than anticipated premium increases, anecdotally averaging around 20%.
At least what we're seeing.
Yeah.
I know in the press they've reported something closer to like 11, 12, but we're seeing higher numbers than that.
Yeah, at least 2 of my clients have received 19% increases. And despite every CEO and small business owner's effort to budget for that, obviously that is an unanticipated expense. So Jen and I are going to talk a little bit about what you can do to mitigate the impact in the immediate future, and also what you can do to think and plan long term so that a larger than anticipated benefits increase, doesn't totally destroy your bottom line.
Well, let me start actually before the renewal process. If you're a small business owner and you haven't yet put in group healthcare benefits and you think that you want to do it, my guidance would be if you don't have to and people aren't specifically asking for it and your recruiting pipeline isn't suffering because of it, don't do it. I think there's a lot that's up in the air this year around renewals, around what's happening with the exchanges, how that's going to play out. I think over the next 4 to 6 months, we'll really see what things look like. My first guidance is there's probably more predictable ways to spend your budget dollar than putting it into group healthcare. That being said, many of us included, are already on the group healthcare trajectory. I don't know. So every year we've seen an increase. Mm-hmm. Some years have been higher increases than usual. I think a few things that you can think about as you're going into open enrollment this year. The first is if the increase is higher than expected, take a look and see what's available on the market. There's usually an option. There's a lot of carriers out there. It doesn't matter what state you're in. There are always options. What can you do to maybe shift people into a high deductible plan, offering a health savings account? That's a wonderful tax advantage solution that can help people put money away for future healthcare needs. It's not tax, it's a pre-tax deduction. The growth, if it's put into one of these platforms that helps you invest the money in some index funds or whatever, the growth is tax-free. And then when you have a qualified expense, you can withdraw the money without tax as well. So that's a wonderful option. The other thing that you can do is look at, even if you're not putting company dollars toward a health spending account, health savings account, excuse me, you can open one up and give people the option to contribute to it on their own, and then use some of the savings money into other areas of the benefits kind of portfolio in terms of what you're doing. Beyond that, I think the other options are really around how you attribute the increase between the employer and the employee. I personally don't believe in sharing what the dollar amount or the percentage is of the employer contribution, because I feel that this is something that is a business-driven budgeting conversation around what the company can absorb and what makes sense relative to what the employees are spending. So, let's say your increase is 20%, and if you split, cost share split down the middle, everyone's getting a 20% increase, so to speak, depending on what they're used to paying so far. But you may decide to shift that, either take more for yourself as far as what the actual increase is, or shift more to the employees, particularly if traditionally you've been covering the lion's share of the premium cost. Now might be the time to say, listen, up to now we've been taking the vast majority of the expenses related to group healthcare. Based on this year's increase, we're no longer in a position to do that. We're now going to be shifting more of this expense to the employees as a pre-tax deduction from your paycheck, and communicating the what and the whys of that.
Yeah, I think messaging is incredibly important, right? And it's part of it is we need to assume that our employees are intelligent people, right?
Yep.
For the most part.
And well, they're intelligent, but there's a lot of murkiness in the whole healthcare
Yeah.
landscape here.
But at the end of the day, they see the headlines, they know what's going on in the news, they are able to create some type of line of sight between, okay, how is this going to impact me? So I think really communicating the why within reason. Again, like we always say, communicate the why, be as open as possible without feeling like you need to open the book's business to every employee in the company. I think the way you communicate benefits and being comfortable with saying, hey, our coverage over the past 3 or 4 years has been pretty significant. We just can't continue that, especially because it's not aligned with the goals of the business or the profitability of the business. We are still contributing. We just need to shift how we're doing it is really critically important so that employees just don't necessarily feel like they're getting the shaft, right? Like all of a sudden it's not like, oh, well, now you all of a sudden have to pay for this without any reason, or just say, hey, enroll here, and then they log into the portal for the first time or they fill out the form and they're like, oh, I'm going to have to pay $200 more per paycheck. That's not the way to do it.
No. I think communication is important. One advantage, and you touched on it, there's been so much press around this. I don't know anyone who isn't aware that healthcare costs are going up.
Right.
And certainly anyone who today is getting their healthcare off the exchanges is sort of on tenterhooks waiting to see what those prices come back as. So, people are aware. I don't think owners should be afraid of taking that communication into the room or the town hall and being like, look, this is where we're at. This is what we can do. This is what we can't do. And kind of evaluating that every year.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's important too is in the work that I do directly with employees at our clients is they don't necessarily understand at times the inner workings of benefits.
That's fair.
They ultimately see what shows up on their paycheck. They see it as the line item, what their contribution is, and then what they're getting in return when they show up at their doctor's office. What are some benefits of communicating the benefits plan and the company's contribution to the extent comfortable in the larger picture as it relates to a total reward statement or just a snapshot of an individual's compensation?
I'm a big fan of total reward statements, as you know well.
Yep.
So I think there's great messaging around healthcare benefits is one part of all of the benefits that we offer you and one part of all of the total rewards or total compensation that we offer you. A total reward statement is basically something where you're going through, and you can get most of this out of payroll, but there's also some budgetary items that you put in where you're saying, all right, this is your base salary, this is all of your variable pay if you're offering that, this is the total cost of your benefits as a total unit. So we group them together. So in our case, it's healthcare, vision, dental, 401k. We have some additional perquisites. We kind of bundle those together. And really just giving the employee the perspective, okay, this is the total investment that my employer is making in me. And giving that, and we also show it year over year so people can see how their total rewards grow over time. And well, the upside is if your healthcare increases are going up over time, that money you're going to demonstrate that you're contributing more, even if you're not demonstrating to them exactly how much you're putting on the table to pay for the benefits. The other thing that I'll say is there's very few scenarios where I think it's a good idea to cover all of the expenses on group healthcare. And the other thing that I'll say is that if someone is offering group healthcare at a 100%, I'll call it sponsorship, where they're paying the whole bill, employees are required to enroll. They don't have an option. So if the employer is covering all of it, unless there is some employee contribution, they don't have that option to waive out. That's a weird thing that we came across actually recently that I wasn't aware of previously. So I'll throw that out there for folks.
And actually, I do want to highlight, we were going to wrap up, but I want to highlight the idea that if ultimately employer is choosing to cover 100% of the benefits premiums cost, my question is always going to be, is that sustainable?
Yeah,
right?
100%.
Especially now that we have a data set that says, listen, they've increased exponentially over the years, but in 2026, we experienced this larger than anticipated.
And what's going to happen next year?
Right. You really have to think, and even if you're willing to cover, say, 90%, 80%, whatever it is, the other question should always be, is this sustainable? Because if we get into 2027 and there's a 100% coverage of an employer, what happens if increases are 20, 25%? Is that really something that you can handle? And if not, you are now having a more difficult conversation because the ability to afford has become greater, and the change is going to be more shocking on the employees.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Beyond that, I think it's just, like all things with compensation, I think transparency is really important. The degree to which you're able to be candid with people about where you're putting company money to support their growth and their wellness, and how that plays into the whole concept around money coming in, money coming out, how much you're investing in your people, whether that's showing up as their base salary or that's showing up in the benefits portfolio. It should be tied back to your culture and values. You should feel comfortable talking about it. And it's okay to let people know that there's a change in a negative direction because the costs are outpacing what you're able to keep up with.
Well, thanks so much. We know benefits season is always very interesting for business owners as well as for the HR professionals, making sure that everyone actively enrolls in their plan. We hope you found this useful, and if you did, please like, comment, subscribe, and share. And we will be back probably next week to tackle another relevant HR topic.
I'm sure it'll stick along the lines of comp and ben. This season is all about the comp and ben.
Or I'm sure there will be some employment law that suddenly we need to break down.
Right? Yeah.
All right. See you later.